So this is just the first of a couple different videos that I'm going to make to help you to understand and use some terminology that will be specific for interpreting dramas. You'll see some overlap in some of the terms that we've used for other types of literature. There will be some overlap and some things that are just exclusive to drama. So I think we'll review a few things and add some new things in here.
Hi, Milton. What's happening?
I'm sorry.
I'm going to have to ask you to go ahead and move your desk again. So,
no.
If you could go ahead and get it as far back against that wall as possible, that would be great.
No, because I was...
That way we'll have some room for some of these
had to move
boxes and things we need to put in here.
There's no room.
And, oh, there it is.
What?
Here, let me just go ahead and get that from you. Great. So, if you could just get to that as soon as possible, that would be terrific, okay? Thanks a bunch, Milton. Goodbye.
Well, okay, but I could set the building on fire.
Okay, so I wanted to share this example because I think it's a really good example of characterization. It's from the movie Office Space, and you can see in that little clip a lot of very specific traits of both the characters, of Milton, who has the stapler, and of Lumbergh, who's coming up to him. You'll probably notice that Milton stutters a lot, that he seems really nervous. You'll probably notice his glasses, his pocket protector. All of those little details build Milton's character. And you'll probably notice that Lumbergh has kind of a careless attitude, a little indifferent, kind of rude, but not in an obvious way. He has a lot of uhs and ums and pausing in his speech, and he speaks kind of slowly. So all of those things build the character. So what is it that authors use to establish their characters? The actual process in itself is called characterization. And that's a process of establishing your characters. You can use how they speak, the specific register they use, informal, formal language. You can use their vocabulary to establish who they are. Their interactions with the other characters that they are involved with in the play or in the novel. They can use, particularly in a play or a movie, you have the ability to use the gestures, even facial expressions, to express and get to know the character more. You can use their physical appearance. Oftentimes, the character's physical appearance is used to reflect their inner feelings as well. In fact, there's a device called a pathetic fallacy, which is when you use the external world, the environment around the characters, to express the inner feelings of the characters. So oftentimes that comes with personification. So if the character's feeling very depressed, the environment might be barren, there might be personification as well, used to really give that environment of depression. And finally, there might be some symbolism used to establish the character. Sometimes even there might be some symbolic meaning in their name. So moving on to types of characters, I'm sure that you're already familiar with the protagonist and the antagonist. So the protagonist is the main character in the story, and the antagonist is the character that's working against them in some way. But I also wanted to highlight that there are characters that can be both the protagonist and the antagonist. Like if you take the example of Fight Club, well, there you have a case of kind of a multiple personality disorder where the character's, really physically even fighting against himself. Or you can also take the example of Holden, who also does this. He kind of works against himself. He's battling himself, battling his own feelings, his own depression, his own antisocial tendencies, and so he becomes his own antagonist as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. Another type of character that we're going to see is the foil character. The foil characters are characters that are around the protagonist. Sometimes might be one or two foil characters. They're usually secondary, and they're called foil, and hopefully you can remember them because the foil is kind of reflective, and the foil characters help to show us more about the protagonist. So they almost reflect against them. Oftentimes it's because they specifically contrast the protagonist's personality. Now, some foil characters, like you can see with Harry Potter and Malfoy, they are actually enemies. But Malfoy's kind of evil nature helps to emphasize how good Harry is. You can also have foils that aren't enemies. They're actually on the same side, or they're friends of the protagonist, like Mercutio and Romeo. Mercutio, his cynicism helps to highlight Romeo's romanticism. So, where Mercutio is kind of cynical and funny and not very serious about life, Romeo is dead serious and a romantic, and so Mercutio helps to highlight Romeo's main qualities by providing a contrast. So up until now, I think a lot of the devices should be familiar to you. The next couple may or may not be familiar to you, but they're also devices I think are often confused, so I want to review them. A soliloquy is a speech in a play that is meant to be heard by the audience but not by the other characters on the stage. If there are no other characters present, the soliloquy represents the character thinking aloud, just like in Hamlet, the most famous soliloquy that I can think of is to be or not to be.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to.
So in the soliloquy, the actor the character is not necessarily aware that the audience is there. A lot of times it's really them kind of speaking aloud for themselves. They're going through some thoughts aloud, but it is a speech. So you might have watched that soliloquy and thought, I thought that was a monologue. And you're actually right. It is a monologue as well. They get confused because a soliloquy is actually a type of monologue. So the definition of a monologue is a speech by a single character without another character's response. But that's a little bit more broad than the soliloquy is. The monologue can mean that the character is giving their own speech to the other characters on stage, whereas soliloquy is the character giving the speech and the rest of the characters may or may not be paying attention to them. And they certainly aren't necessarily aware that there's an audience and that the audience is listening to them, which makes it quite different from the aside. And I put the example of Malcolm in the middle there because it's a perfect example of aside. In an aside, the words spoken by an actor are directly to an audience, and they're not heard by the other characters on stage during a play. So throughout the show in Malcolm in the Middle, if you've watched that, Malcolm often turns to the camera and talks directly to the audience, to us, without his family or anyone else aware of what he's saying, and that is an aside. So finally, I'll end with just a quick review of subtext.
You look terrible. I want you to eat. I want you to rest well, and a month from now, this Hollywood big shot's gonna give you what you want.
Too late. They start shooting in a week.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Okay, so we all know, even without having seen the movie, that this offer that he can't refuse he's not really saying I'm going to make him an offer. He's basically saying I'm going to threaten him and make it so that he can't say no. not necessarily what you think of as a typical offer. And so the subtext they're the unspoken thoughts of the characters. Subtext can be expressed through gesture, through intonation, through expression, through just kind of understanding the character and the situation that they're in, and what might be the implied meaning of their words, and not necessarily the literal meaning of what they're saying. So you always want to look for subtext because it can tell you a lot about the characters and it can tell you a lot about the plot.